These are the sounds anyone might think of when a cemetery comes to mind. Cemeteries bring up some of the spookiest and saddest emotions in all of us. My name is Kinley Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, which is going to introduce you to a cemetery of different kind. The Lexington Cemetery, found in Lexington, Kentucky. As you drive down West Main Street in Lexington, you will find a set of tall limestone columns with iron gates. These are the gates that welcome you to the Lexington Cemetery, which has existed formally since 1848. The cemetery is both an important historical and cultural part of Lexington. While most people don't like to think about the inevitable end of life, the Lexington Cemetery and its 170 acres of grounds create a culture that is not just a final resting place, but also serves as a very unique place of beauty and nature enjoyed by the many people who come here. One would think the culture of daily life of a cemetery is fairly unchanging. How much really changed is such a place? Miles Penn is the main horticulturist and groundkeeper for the cemetery. He worked at the cemetery for 23 years. We met in the main administrative building for the cemetery, which dates back to the 1840s, and once served as a chapel for services here. I posted the question to him, what is the most interesting thing about working at a cemetery? After a few moments, Mr. Penn answered with,
There he is. I do something different every day.
Mhm.
One day we might be burying somebody. One day we might be moving somebody in from the 1800s from across state. So yeah, there's always something different every day. It's never the same thing.
This is evident as you move through the cemetery on any given day. There are gravestones too old to read, which have been here for over 100 years. There are famous Kentuckians buried here that have great historical accomplishments to their name. Then there are the people who come to enjoy the cemetery itself. People from all walks of life come to the Lexington Cemetery for various reasons. Some of the most common visitors are those here to grieve the loss of a loved one, while other visitors bring their children just to feed the ducks at the duck pond. When I asked Mr. Penn about the visitors who come to the cemetery, he said,
The we like to get people in here without there being a death or a funeral.
Mhm.
You know, we have a lot of people that come and eat their lunch. We do a lot of tours, history tours, tree tours, landscaping tours. You know, we want people to kind of come in and see the cemetery before there's been a death in the family. You know, just come in and say, hey, well, I just like going to the cemetery.
the cemetery is a unique place for this very reason. The cemetery is recognized as an arboretum and bird sanctuary. There are nearly 42 different species of trees here and 200 different species of birds that can be seen during any particular season. The cemetery has a great garden-like feel to it. When Mr. Penn reflected on the environment of the cemetery itself, he said this to say.
It's, well, for me, I was raised in a rural area, so this is kind of an oasis for me.
Mhm.
My wife's from the city, so she loves living in the city, but I come to work each day and get to roam around 170 acres that then I get to go back out into Lexington. But other than that, that's, I guess, the biggest thing.
The beautiful old trees stretch over the winding lanes of the cemetery and lead people on different paths through the land. On this day, nearly every bench on the front pond is filled with parents keeping a watchful eye over their children as they toss breadcrumbs and leftover lunches to the ducks. The sun shines through the tall trees and lights the water in the pond, as the fountain can be heard in the distance. It is a peaceful place of enjoyment. The cemetery is full of happiness and life today. There is also another part of the culture in cemetery, though, that we are more familiar with, the certain end of life that all humans have to face. While the cemetery is a place of beauty, behind its rocks and walls, it is also a culture of human grieving and shared experiences by many of the people who come to mourn.
There's some people that you know on a first name basis because when there's been a death, there's some people that are in here weekly. So you get to know them on kind of a first name basis. You stop by and say, hey, how's everything going? You know, you kind of get to know what's going on in their lives. So there's, I think that's kind of neat where you see different people all the time.
The cemetery, Peter Gonnell, has worked at the cemetery since he was 16 years old. He was hired on early in life because his father was a well-known funeral director in Lexington and had a good working relationship with the cemetery administrator at that time. While Mr. Gonnell's duties include helping families pre-plan for their cemetery needs, as well as helping those who have an immediate need for burial service in spaces. He spoke with me about this part of his job at the cemetery and his interactions he has with families. Mr. Gonnell reflected and said,
I think it's interesting to the different people that you encounter, at various stages of their life. I know sometimes it is stressful because they have had a loss, but still you see how, good people really are at different times of even as stressed out as they may be, they still are, pretty good people.
what is it? As anyone can imagine, working at the Lexington Cemetery must be a very unique experience and require a special set of people and skills. On average, 5 to 7 services are held at the cemetery. While the Lexington certainly is a beautiful spot to say goodbye to loved ones, there is a certain sadness that hangs in the air here. I wanted to find out how dealing with this aspect of the cemetery culture impacts these two men. As Mr. Penn stared down at the floor for a minute, I could feel his disposition change from a cheery one to a more serious tone. It was suddenly very evident that this part of the work does consume him. Mr. Penn sighed and then shared.
With different people, there's different situations you have to go through. Sometimes it's a really quick, maybe a heart attack or a car accident. So, and we do training, we go to classes. I mean, there's a lot of different things out there. How to deal with people, and every family's different. There's no one way to deal with a certain.
This is the sad reality of the Lexington Cemetery. For many of the people you drive by, there is a hurt and loss. Sometimes just being in the cemetery itself brings some comfort to these people because it's a peaceful atmosphere. I found that both Mr. Penn and Mr. Gonnell have a certain balance in their lives because of their work here. Mr. Gunnell explained in his response to the cemetery impacts his life by saying,
I think it impacts me in the means of I don't jump to get really stressed out quickly. I kind of have an even keel about myself because I see a lot of people at their worst and realize that my minor stresses during the day don't compare to what some of these people are going through.
I found as I visited the cemetery that everyone here shares this common respect and understanding of what the place represents in the process of life and what people may be experiencing when they come here. Mr. Gunnell wanted to share with me just one of the most unique tributes he has ever witnessed while working here at the Lexington Cemetery. He wanted to describe that
A family member that was being buried was a pilot during the service, and the type of plane that he flew during the war happened to be on display here at the airport.
Wow.
And there was another pilot friend of his that actually flew that plane over the cemetery during his service.
Wow. Okay. I cannot help but think that this was a true tribute to an old friend. This is an important part of the culture of the cemetery. It gives people both an opportunity and a place to honor those they have loved and lost. As I wrap up, I hope that I've captured for you what makes the Lexington Cemetery one of the most unique places in Lexington to visit. As you follow the winding yellow line back to the cemetery entrance, you will pass the literal thousands of gravestones and hopefully reflect not only on the memories of those who remain here, but also on the importance of the lives well lived. The cemetery has much to offer to our community and is rooted in the history of our city. Whether it's coming in here to enjoy your lunch on a beautiful fall day, or sharing a duck feeding with your family on a weekend, or perhaps saying it is a goodbye to someone you love, the Lexington Cemetery has a culture of welcomeness and comfort. Here we are all reminded that our lives are a journey of twists and turns, moments and memories.